Welcome everyone to a very special workshop that we've put together for this year's Modern Retailing Conference, hosted by the Pasch Enterprise team. We want to thank Brian and his entire team for the opportunity to join such an incredible lineup of speakers and guests supporting dealers in a topic that is so near and dear to our hearts, which is modern retailing. It's so exciting to see this event evolve and grow year after year. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our team today. I'm Tiffany Peeler. I oversee sales and operations at Proactive Dealer Solutions. We also have with us Matt Lowry, our Director of Training, and Mike Esposito, Senior Field Operations Leader with Southeast Toyota. Hi guys.
Hey, hello. All right.
Our teams have been working together for more than 3 years now, almost 4 actually.
Yes.
And a very special partnership that has really helped Southeast Toyota dealers focus on implementing new modern retailing processes to enhance customer experience and, more specifically, identify opportunities to improve alignment between the online and the showroom experience for their guests. This partnership initiative actually launched just before COVID hit us, I think, in 2019.
Yep.
Starting with progressive dealers who are ready to embrace new digital retailing technologies, and the SET leadership team realizing the importance of laying the right groundwork for this technology. Matt, why don't you share a little bit more with our audience members on how this partnership got started?
And so it's funny that it was now, 3 years ago?
Almost 4.
Almost 4
which is
years ago.
Insane.
When we started this out. And when we started having conversations with SET and what they were wanting to do with modern retailing, digital retailing, and their SmartPath tool, I have to say I was a little confused at first because as they sat there and said, we want to be more transparent with customers and we want to give them options. And let's be honest, a lot of our background was we get them in the door, right? That's what we do. We were the traditional retail trainers. That's what we did. And when we got together and really started talking about it, what we really started to understand was it's just the way customers have changed over the years. It's still about moving and motivating customers. It's just how do we move and motivate customers today versus how do we move and motivate customers 10 to 20 years ago.
Yeah, and I think even back then, it was well before SmartPath was even ready to be launched or implemented. And what I appreciate so much about you guys at SET is that you had the foresight to say, hey, we know that we're gonna do this big thing in a couple years, but we think that we should start preparing our stores now for the adoption of this. We didn't have any idea that COVID was going to pull, the future into the present as quickly as it did. But at the time, you guys were already so progressive in thinking, hey, let's lean on some of the digital retailing tools that are out there today. Let's partner with a training company to implement a process that's focused about providing this modern experience before we get to SmartPath, which I thought was so great. So, Mike, you have been in the industry now with Southeast Toyota Distributors for more than 13 years. You look great, by the way.
13 years, isn't that like dog years?
Okay. And you've actually worked with 177 dealerships as a part of SET. How have you seen the industry evolve, and how have you seen the evolution into modern retailing be adopted by your stores?
So it's funny, we worked with over 100 of our stores with some type of digital retailing tool, because before COVID even hit, a lot of stores have interest in launching digital retail. But what does that mean? At the end of the day, we've learned a lot, because what most dealers thought about was, can I buy a car online? And what customers want to do is they want to all buy cars online. We realized that there's not a lot of customers that want to go all the way from A to Z online. But there's so many things that we've learned when it comes down to what's most important. And culture is always going to be the most important thing at our dealerships, to get their management and leadership team bought in on what are we doing and why are we doing this. So we try to work with the stores at first to really get them thinking about what's most important to them, what's their strategy that they want to accomplish with their store, and how does that impact their guests. Because this is all about the guest experience, which is always what we have to focus on, is how do we make sure the guest experience, both online and in store, is matched up so we can create a more efficient experience and a more transparent experience for them.
I love what you said there too, with You know, we really thought at the beginning digital retailing was about buying a car online, and it really isn't.
No.
Most people do not want to buy a car online, but they want more information. They want to be able to do more at their pace, the way they want to do it. They want to have more say-so in it. They don't want to go A to Z online. And it is really understanding that, and that's the difference between, you know, what a lot of people think digital retailing and just modern retailing.
Yeah, the digital retailing phrase is, in my opinion, terrible. It doesn't mean anything. So because when you say digital retail, most dealerships would associate that should be sent to the BDC or the internet department for them to handle, but that doesn't affect the rest of our sales department. That doesn't affect on the floor what happens in the showroom. That doesn't affect our phone calls. So if you're trying to create a better experience for your guests, but you're only inserting it into one piece of your business, how do you expect that to match and to truly create that better experience if only a couple people are touching it?
Yeah.
So that's something we've learned quickly that we've got to get away from.
I think that's the perfect segue actually into what our session is ultimately about. So today we're really going to be laying the groundwork for and talking about modern retailing. So less digital retailing and more modern retailing. And that first is going to start with aligning processes with technology. Before we do that, let's talk about why, right? Like, why prepare? So the first thing is, why should we prepare before we take on a modern retailing initiative or launch a digital retailing tool? So I have two parts of this question, actually. So I'm going to pitch it to Mike first. Mike, why do you think that it's so important that we prepare before we jump right into a modern retailing program of some kind or launch a tool? Why do you think it's important for the customer?
Well, you got to start with the customer. What is their experience and what should their experience be? Many times we look at the road to the sale process and we got the same road to the sale for the most part, but when do we actually consider looking at it from the customer's lens? What they go through on the website, when they go on and look at your inventory, when they look and submit lead information to your dealership, when they come into the store and how that's matched up. So one thing that's really important is if we consider the customer, how do we make sure that our processes are aligned to what the customer expects? That's really important.
So, and let me ask you this too. How many dealerships have you been working with that they just thought it was going to be an easy button, right? I just sign up, and then, great, this just happens,
Sure.
right? And what are some of the struggles that we've seen out there?
I think COVID has really hurt that, right? Because a lot of times with COVID, we've seen dealers just want to turn on a technology or turn on a widget, if you will. And it's, you know, expecting this to work without having any kind of strategy behind it, without having any kind of processes, without changing the structure of your department, without looking at pay plans. So all the things that matter when it comes to selling cars are not considered. So we expect the technology to change everything, and that quickly fails because one dealership didn't buy in the beginning. This team at the store saw that the management team doesn't buy in, and then all of a sudden we're just back to square one. So we didn't really accomplish anything. We spent a lot of time and money on something that just didn't work.
Yeah. So that, before we jump into all the pitfalls, and there are several, because we have a whole slide dedicated to it, why that leads me into then the second part of my question. Why is it important that we prepare our store for a modern retailing initiative then?
Sure, and a lot of our partnership, right, with Southeast Toyota has been the preparation before it actually launches. We really concentrated that with the SET team because what we realized was it's not just going in and setting up the tool, it's not just going in and launching it and saying, you know, does it work and does the button do what the button's supposed to do? But a lot of it is the store ready for this? All those things that he talked about. What is our current process now? What happens when a customer walks in off of your lot right now? How are you desking a deal right now? How are you presenting numbers? How are you doing your F&I process? What did you do online, and are you reconnecting that? And so if you don't prepare beforehand and identify all those different areas, what are we doing right now? What are we going to be doing in the future? And where are those pain points? Where do they rub against each other so we can fix it first before it goes out? Because there's nothing worse than breaking a promise to a customer. And so when you start advertising this and you start talking about it, and this is what we do, we're doing modern retailing. You can go online, you can see a vehicle, you can come inside, you're going to get the same experience, and I believe you, and then I come and I don't get that, you've just ruined everything that you're trying to set up and what you're trying to do with modern retailing.
Yeah, and I think from the dealership standpoint, another reason to prepare the team is I think we forget who are the people using this, right? And who it impacts day to day. And so often we can turn on tools that we think will have an immediate impact, but we haven't got the team's buy-in on that tool or informed them or let them be a part of how this is going to impact or change the way that we do business and interact with the customer and what's in it for them. Right? And if you don't do that, they're not in.
Before we even get to the technology and the tool and the process behind it, we've got to start at the top, and that's always with the management team and the leadership team. We've got to start with the culture and identify what are those things that will impact the success of this from our culture at our store. And that has to be from the owner and the general manager. Simple. If that doesn't happen, it's not going to work. Because you've got to talk about with the leadership team why we're doing this. We'll get into the how, but we got to start with the why. That has to be communicated to the team at the store so they know that we're making changes because of X, Y, Z, and they can start to believe in it. But if we don't have that in the beginning, all the effort that we do later on is not going to take us far. So,
and to that point, and I completely agree with you, it starts right from the top down, but a lot of times where it falls is that mid-level management. Right?
Absolutely.
Because a dealer or general manager will say, this is what we're going to do. This is going to be our culture. This is where we're going. But again, if you don't prepare beforehand and make sure that mid-level management, that they're also in agreement that this is a good thing and this is where we're going. Dealers say all the time, I'll ask them, why is your team going to do this? Why are they going to embrace this and do this? And 9 times out of 10 I hear, because I'll tell them to. And it's, well, how well has that worked for you in the past? Right? How many times have you told them to do something? They'll nod their head at you, and then they keep doing what it is they want to do. So what we have to do in that preparation stage is not, right, it has to come from the dealer and general manager, but then we have to make sure that mid-level management, those top salespeople, that they're in on this as well, and they see the benefit. Not just that this is the new fad or the new flavor of the month, but that this is better for them and for the customer.
So look at all the things that we're talking about in preparation for launching, where we have many stores that just want to turn this on. These are all really important things to get in front of before we even talk about launching. These are things that have to be identified and talked about and discussed. One thing that we found is successful for our stores is coming in before, doing a leadership kickoff with the store, and then ultimately going through a process mapping session.
Ooh, not yet. We're going to get there, Mike. Don't jump too far ahead. All right. So let's talk about, before we get into the details, and you guys all start taking notes so you know how to go do this at your store, let's talk about the state of a lot of the stores today. So funny enough, actually 52% of dealerships classify their store as highly virtual or completely virtual.
I'm going to laugh at that one.
I don't know what that means.
Right. So he laughs, and Mike is just thoroughly confused, as am I. So let's first talk about the statistic. You had such an intense reaction to this statistic, so I'm going to let Matt go first.
There, right, 52% say, right, so I guess it would be like asking me on a scale of 1 to 10, how great do I think I am, right? I think I'm a 10 all day long. But when we actually go into dealerships, if you're doing things like we're still packing payments, we're not being transparent, we're starting at addendum, if they switch cars, we're not acknowledging what they're doing on the website, I'm sorry, I just completely disagree with that. And I see the number of stores that are really doing that. It's growing, but it is still a very small percentage of stores that really get it. What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, again, and going back to the culture of the dealership, if you don't change the culture and identify those pain points that your store is going to face, because we've been doing things the same way for how many years? These are things that are not going to mesh well with what we're trying to do. And again, going back to that North Star, the customer, the experience for the customer, transparency, efficiency, how are those going to play a role in that?
Absolutely.
So I think that, and what we've seen is that this number has really fluctuated, right? Quite a bit from dealers that really rushed to go out and purchase a digital retailing solution when COVID was, happening, and we were in the thick of it, to those that have now defected because showroom traffic is back and supply is low and demand is high, and we've kind of reverted back to some of those old way of doing things. Mike, would you agree? What have you seen for some stores that maybe adopted digital retailing during COVID because they saw it as the only way, and how have they defected, or maybe not now? What are you seeing out there for your stores?
I think a lot of them saw the grand plan of being able to use this to sell a car online, when those dealers that that was their only choice, or where customers didn't want to come into the showroom, so they thought that this is going to be the solution for them. And obviously now, as customers are coming back into the stores and we've gotten away from that virtual aspect of what happened with COVID, is they go back to their normal process. They go back to what they've done for the past 30 years because that's what they know and that's what the team has worked for the team. So why would they want to go back and revert back to what they've used during COVID when this is what they know?
You also have, too, with dealerships, I think a lot of it is, they were thinking of digital retailing for like incremental sales. That I'll sell a few cars online, but I'm not going to change everything I'm doing in the showroom. Why am I going to mess up this that I've been doing for 30 years? I just want this to incrementally sell a few other on the side. And what they have to start understanding is, no, it is a culture change, and we have to change everything from that online experience all the way through the showroom and all the way through active delivery and what that looks like. So it's a much bigger project than what I think most do. So the 52%, I'm willing to bet 52% signed up with some sort of tool or has some sort of option to do that. Why I laughed is there's nowhere close to that has actually embraced that through their entire culture of the dealership.
So you may have the leadership team that has an idea in their mind, but I would challenge you, go mystery shop a couple lead responses. Go pick up the phone and call based on what you've experienced on that digital retail tool, and talk about it with the person that answers the phone, and see what you had in your mind, what that experience was supposed to be, is executed on.
Mike is full of perfect transitions into our next point. So that brings us to some of the pitfalls that we've seen. First, let's talk through a couple of these. And then we'll talk about some of the factors that help drive success in some of the stores. So I've got like 5 common pitfalls that we're used to seeing in stores adopting new modern retailing initiatives, right, or tools. And let's not be shy. Let's talk about real experiences that we've had and seen related to a couple of these items. So first, outdated culture and mindset, which we've already started to touch on a little bit. No omni-channel strategy, which I think is a big important point for us to talk through, because I think that when dealers adopt a digital retailing tool, and they call it modern retailing, they're just turning on the tool and they're not considering the customers who start that and move to phone and then come in and then go back online, right? So no omni-channel strategy. Let's start with those 2 first, and then we'll do the next 3.
Okay.
All right, so outdated culture and mindset and no omni-channel strategy. Have you guys seen stores, or can you talk about experiences where maybe there was no omni-channel strategy in place, right? Like they turned on their tool and they didn't update how they were communicating with the customer outside of that tool being on their website.
I think that's
a big problem.
This is something that I'm sure everyone has experienced, and something that's really challenging, but it's so important. A customer that goes onto your website, where we know most customers start their buying experience, they do all these things on your website, they interact with the digital retailing tool, they do X, Y, Z, and they walk in your door and they're started from scratch. Hey, Mike, how can I help you today? We don't know what they've done. We don't acknowledge what they've seen. We give them maybe a different price. We give them a completely different experience than what they've seen on your website. And now all of a sudden you've went backwards and you've created an even worse experience for that customer, because you set the experience on the website of this is going to be seamless, it's going to be easy, and everything is going to be the same. But in fact, unfortunately, that didn't happen. So that's really important, is we make sure that that transition between a customer that has seen your website online, may or may not have submitted a lead to your website. Doesn't mean that they haven't looked at your website and seen information. When they walk in the door, how do we make sure that that experience is consistent and picks them up where they left off versus starting them from scratch and completely ignoring what they've done?
And I think we have to start having a real conversation. I mean, do we really think customers are really this confused by it? I mean, and I understand it. Back in the day, that was my model, right? If someone came in, it didn't matter what they did on the website. You went out and we gave them first pencil, and we would just ignore all that. And if the customer doesn't say anything, don't say anything. Just ignore it and pretend like it all started over. But how many times do you have a customer sitting there like this? You could see the confusion on their face, and they go, I got to think about it. Do you think they really got to think about it, or do you think you didn't match up what they've seen online and what they were expecting to the experience here, and we just want to ignore it and say, if they don't talk about it, we don't talk about it? Where what we have to get past is say, one, acknowledge anything they've done online, right, and show respect for that. And then two, if for whatever reason we're presenting anything different than what they've seen online, regardless if they submitted a lead, you know they were on your website. If we have to present something differently, how about be upfront with it and tell them, why am I showing it to them in a different way? Hey, I know you were looking on the website and you were looking at the stock number 1, 2, 3, 4. We don't have that one. We have this one. Let me explain to you why this looks a little different. As long as you acknowledge it and you bring it up, go, because I promise you, when you don't say it, they don't say it. Instead, they just go, I got to think about it, and they go somewhere else.
And you know what that is? That's value. That's value to a customer, because now, instead of having to worry about all the things that we used to do, we can focus on things that matter to a customer. We can talk about things that matter when it comes to finding the right car. We don't have to go back and forth and play these games. We can deliver value to the customer, and that's what matters to them, and that's what's going to help secure the deal.
Absolutely.
So that's really important.
I've got a little something I wanted to add to this too, because I think that so often what I have seen when we launch these initiatives in stores is we focus so much on the internet, the website, and the floor. When the customer comes in, to their point, we need to make sure that we're updating our, traditional road to the sale with our sales team. Customer shows up, make sure we look at what they've done so far and how to take them onto the next step. Pick up where they left off, essentially. But I think the piece that we leave out is what happens when that same customer who starts online calls in. Right? So if a customer, 92% of customers start their process online. They start their process shopping online just to collect information, right? Start their research. And then I might start on my phone, on my couch at night, and I'm going to start that shopping process. 2 days later, I might now have done some research, but I have a question, so I'm choosing to pick up the phone and call the store. Is it a different team handling those phone ups? Are they still handling the phone up in the traditional way? Just come in, time to come in?
Let's face it, that's what most say. Most are, great, when would you like to come in and meet with my sales manager? Was that later today or tomorrow, right?
This is what about someone who texts in? So many of our dealers are reaching out to get textable lines so that they can put a textable phone number on their website and so customers can begin texting with them, because a lot of customers want to, right? And what happens if they text in? Do we handle that text message opportunity like a traditional phone lead or internet lead and send the, hey, when can we connect, when can you come in type of response? Or are we really adopting an omni-channel process where whoever's responsible for taking those inbound phone calls or responding to those text messages, or maybe a customer who starts online but submits a traditional lead form and doesn't go through the digital retailing route, are we leveraging the digital retailing as an option for that customer to start their process or answer their questions, right? Are we updating our traditional processes to have an omni-channel approach that revolves around the modern customer's shopping process? Does that make sense?
So what I would say to that too, and I never thought I would ever say this, because we have always been pick up the phone and dial, right? Pick up the phone and call the customer. Pick up the phone and get the customer on the phone. And I still, right, I understand I can help move and motivate customers better if I'm talking to them live. But instead of just picking up the phone and calling everyone, because again, why don't salespeople, BDCs, why don't they pick up the phone and call? To me, a lot of it is the juice worth the squeeze. What are we getting out of it? I'm doing an awful lot of this and just, hey, give me a call back, hey, give me a call back, hey, and I'm not getting anything out of it. To me, what we can use texting and all to do is, how about instead of calling all these people, we get them to engage with our tool and then call the people and engage with them the way they want to be engaged with in the tool. So now I don't need to call everyone. Hey, I can send you a link. You can go ahead and start doing this. And then when you have a good time that we can talk about it, because I still do understand no one's going to like the number for their trade. No one's going to think we're selling the car for too low, right? We still want to be able to have a conversation. But to me, what these tools allow us to do is really have much more engaging conversation with the customer about what the customer really wants to talk about, and talk to the customers when they're ready to be spoken to.
Sure. So again, going back to that preparation, this is why it's so important, is these are the exact questions you have to be having as a dealership to decide, are the people that are answering those phones and the ones that are responding to those leads, are they capable of doing that?
Right.
Are they capable of handling that customer? If it's a traditional BDC, are their pay plans aligned? Or are they just focused on get them in the door? And does that distract from that process that you're trying to create and the experience you're trying to create? So these are all things that are really important to identify up front and to really find out what are some of the things that we're going to have to make changes to. And then we can come build processes around how do we use that customer that submits a lead and how do we get them to engage. But I like what you said, and this is one of the things that we've seen that stores find the most successful doing is that outbound outreach, that getting them by submitting a link to the digital retailing tool, to sharing information with them, to engage that customer. Maybe that customer hasn't responded in a couple days. Do we have processes to send them information, to get them to talk and to get them to engage? That's really important.
Yeah, so I think the takeaway there is one of the pitfalls is to not prepare your leadership team, not prepare your team, and to not update your processes. And that's all processes. This is not an internet lead. This is not a digital retailing lead. This is a shopping process for your customer, and that will hurt your customer's experience if you're not updating and preparing all of your team members on how to leverage this technology.
Which goes back to what we started with, preparation, right? This is all the things you need to be discussing and doing before you pick a tool or decide you want to go this. You need to have these kind of conversations, not just do we want to do modern retailing. It needs to be this level of depth. These are the things, are we okay with? Are we willing to do this?
Well, and then it gives you a really good insight to be able to know what's the right tool for you from a technology standpoint. Right? Do you have the capabilities that you're trying to accomplish with your team, that their skill set matches?
Right.
And then we can find the right tool. But if we just try to find the tool based on a concept of what we think is going to be working at our store, we may find that that's not the best approach later on and it's not going to work.
Yeah, that's a great point. All right, so now that we've talked about pitfalls, let's move to factors that drive success. So let's kind of do the same thing here, share with our audience some success stories that we've had for stores that have been able to really find the balance that they've needed between people, process, and technology, because that's ultimately what it comes down to. So the first one is leader. I think the first two actually go together. So let's talk about a store that's been really successful with, creating a modern retail experience. One, through leadership engagement and mid-level management accountability, because I think those two go hand in hand, right? So do you have any stories that stand out of stores that have a high level of leadership engagement and then accountability for their mid-level management team on executing?
Sure.
That stands out.
Yeah, I think that where it all started with the partnership was at Modern Toyota. And this was even before COVID. So Modern Toyota and Jim Butler, the general manager of the store, really had the vision and forethought to really understand this leadership, as we're talking about, is critical. So he was involved throughout this entire process of building out the process and then now holding the team accountable to it. So what we worked together on is using that tool that they had at the time was how do we make sure we're talking through all these things when it comes to changes to their process? They have a traditional BDC, so how do we arm their team with the skills and the knowledge to be able to accommodate that customer online? How do we give them the tools to be able to reach back out to that customer, right? Is the management team over those BDC associates aware and engaging? Because that's going to be critical to make sure that they know what's happening and they can step in where necessary. So that was a really a great experience to see Jim and the team there really executing on a solid game plan and a strategy, and it's worked really well.
And he took ownership from that right from the beginning.
Right.
I mean, and he really pushed that out to his team that this is who we are and this is what we're going to do. And so he really embraced that culture. To be honest, I was surprised how much he embraced it. I was like, I don't know if I'd be going quite this far, right? I mean, this was a few years ago. And it goes back to what we're talking about preparation. So look, not everyone is willing to go all the way here, right? What we have to help dealers understand is, where are you okay with going? Then we map that out in that preparation so that you can find the right tool, whatever it is, to help you with where are you okay with. Not everyone's going to be ready to go and give up all this control, let salespeople really present numbers. I understand. I would go all the way in now, but if I was just starting out and I was just getting into this, I get it. I wouldn't give up all that control in the beginning. What are you okay with? And then you got to start mapping that out and then say, then what's the next step?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, a couple more. Success factors would be to have clear metrics and KPIs. So examples, metrics and KPIs. What are we looking at? What are successful stores looking at to ensure they're being successful with this initiative and their tool?
Sure, you want to start with what are you looking at in SmartPath, and then I'll add on.
Yeah, so from a SmartPath perspective, if we look online, we start there. It's the traditional things that we look at from a lead management perspective. We want to see how things are working from lead volume, your appointment set, your appointment show, your sold, your conversions. You want to be able to see all those standard metrics to see what are we seeing and are we making progress, or do we have some opportunity there? So that's important. We look at, from the website, of course, all the customer behavior from a website standpoint. So of course, getting all the tags on the website, making sure that we can see behaviors, what's working, what's not, so we can make adjustments to the tool where necessary, so we can make sure customers are getting funneled through the website experience as far down as possible. Those are from an online perspective.
Do you also look at what percentage of customers that start in SmartPath are then used or followed up that experience when they show up in the showroom?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Now, and on the website as well, one of the things that I would challenge you to really look at, because we all know the traditional KPIs, appointment rate, contact rate, right show rate, sold rate, all of that. How about that they took the next step? Not everything has to be an appointment, and that's what most don't do. Because if all I did was inquire about a vehicle or what do you have in stock, and you're able to convince me to give you my trade information, isn't that a win? Shouldn't we be tracking that? Did you get me to do the next step? Then did you get me to maybe put in my credit information or look at some payment options? Or each of those is a win that can lead, that to me are just as valuable as the appointment. When you get off the phone, yes, I'd love if you have someone coming in. But if you took someone that was still really high funnel and you got them to take the next step, that's a win too.
It's moving your customer down the sales funnel. And if you're able to get them to commit and complete that next step, then maybe they're not ready to come in yet. Maybe it's not their time. Maybe they can't. But if you can get them to complete the next step, you're that much closer to pushing them out the bottom.
So what you've helped us create with modern Toyota and other stores is doing exactly that with these stages, right? And having processes around each stage. And these are things that are built out in the CRM, so you can make it really simple. Based on that stage the customer is in, we've got specific processes designed to be able to accommodate that customer. And we make it really simple for the team that's handling that customer to know, okay, this is where they are. These are the things that we should be doing to try to guide them through the process to get them to the next step. Obviously, we want to make sure that customer wants to go a different direction, no problem. We're going to get them in and we're going to sell them a car. But that's really important because we've got some framework and we've got some specific processes built out within the CRM that make it easy so you can see from a KPI standpoint, not necessarily the top level metrics, but here's the customers that are in that stage. They're all in I got a trade-in value. Now, we haven't heard from them. They haven't engaged with us, but what should we do to try to get that customer engaged? And we try to approach it from that standpoint. That's been really successful.
Yeah, so there's a different process for each step in that sales process. It's either time to come in, and if you're not ready to do that, well, then let's go ahead and do this, and let's do it remotely. If that's something that's more comfortable for you, right? That doesn't sound too bad now, does it?
That doesn't sound too bad now, does it?
All right, which leads me to aligning process and technology. So we talked about this when we were talking about pitfalls a lot, because this is where I really get hemmed up, because it's just something that we see all the time. It's aligning your process with the technology. You get a tool, making sure that you have a process in place that allows you to leverage that tool or works with that tool and doesn't compete against it, right? And I also think that goes hand in hand with relevant communication, which is what you were getting to with your last point. Relevant communication is the big stuff. We talked about on the pitfalls about using legacy messaging, and now we've really got to update our messaging to the customer, regardless of how they're touching us, inbound, if it's internet, whatever it is, or if we're reaching out to them, updating that. How do we update it?
If you're still sending that email that says, hey, thanks for your inquiry. I see you picked out stock number 1, 2, 3, 4. Nice choice. When would you like to come in and take it for a test drive? Later today or tomorrow? Stop now, right? That does not work. But that's a lot of times what we're seeing is as we're going through these stores, they're thinking about digital retailing. They're thinking about these things, but then they're still sending stuff like that.
Or answering the phone with the same old, you got to come in, I can't give you any information, I need you to come in. We can't do it that way. You've got to update the way everyone communicates. The BDC, the internet department, to your salespeople on the floor, how they're greeting a customer and how they're walking them through the road to the sale whenever they show up. And then number 6, roles, job descriptions, and pay plans. I know that we've been successful with a lot of stores that have really not changed, but rather updated their existing job description or pay plans to reflect what we need your team members to do, right? People will typically work their pay plan.
Sure.
So what are some successes you've seen there? Or what are some updates that maybe you've seen successful stores do?
Sure, I think, from an online perspective, depending on the structure of the store, I think you've got to consider that first. But,
right, yeah.
Depending on how your team is structured and their pay plan, well, besides the appointment, what are some of the things that you can help incentivize them to focus on for the customer? Are your pay plans aligned to that experience that you're trying to provide? And maybe that experience is not solely just on making an appointment, right? So we've got to look to make sure that what we're incentivizing our team to be able to do is aligned to that process and to that strategy that we have. Simple as that. So again, going back to traditional BDC, if their main pay plan is tied around appointments, great, appointments are critical, but are there other things that we can focus their attention on to make sure that they're working with the customer? Because if that's all they have in their mind of, I need to get an appointment, the customer's not there yet, we've completely disconnected the process of what we wanted to accomplish for the customer.
Yeah, and for me, it's really, right, show me a pay plan, I'll show you a job description. So if your pay plan says you get paid on shows and solds, what's my 100% focus? Shows and solds. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't be paying on shows and solds. I'm just saying when we talked about these next stages, right, moving them further down the funnel, can we, right, develop pay plans that help to encourage that? So I get it. I would always ask a customer if they're ready to come in, but when they're not, instead of me just saying, all right, well, call me when you're ready, right? What am I doing to help really move them further down the funnel? And can we set up some stuff right really around that?
Sure. And for the customer that submitted information and we've got a hold of them, great. But what about those customers that we didn't get a hold of?
Right.
What are some of the ways that we can generate that customer's engagement through activities, different things that we know have worked? Videos. Videos are a great example of ways that we can get customers to engage with some valuable information, valuable content. So is that something that you can consider in your pay plan or something along those lines when it comes to generating that engagement for the customer? And
I'd really challenge too, a salesperson's role and responsibility, right, has always been to sell. What we need to really focus on is, we're there to help. No one wants to be sold. I want to be helped. The best way you can sell me is by helping me. And if we work on our salespeople to really understand that's the goal, and sales will come from that, I think it all kind of comes together.
And this is why this is not digital retail.
You're right.
These are conversations that, regardless of using a technology or not, are
Mm-hmm.
so important to consider. So when it comes to modern retail, that's what this boils down to, is having the team get together to decide and find out what the best approach is by considering all these aspects. That's what a modern retail strategy looks like.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about, well, how do I use this tool and what can I do to use the technology? The technology is never going to dictate your process.
No.
That's the one way to quickly fail, is if you let the technology decide your process.
Mm-hmm.
The technology should be layered on top of your process to complement it. And that's really important that we consider what we do with modern
Ultimately,
retail.
you want to allow your sales team, and that's BDC, Internet Department sales people, that's everybody in the store, managers, to become trusted advisors to the customer and to be able to help them along that car buying process. And in order to do that, you've got to do a few things. Create transparency to the customer, give them the information that they need to have access to on the website, and allow your people that are speaking to them to be able to back that up or give the same information. You want to, again, be omni-channel and align all of your processes and relevant communication across all communication pathways for your customer.
She likes that word, omni-channel. Thanks.
It's just important. I see it so much. It bugs me when you're saying you're doing one thing and then you call them and it's a totally different thing.
And it does make you sound smart, too. So
That's why I really say it.
That's it.
And
Customers know what that means.
rethink your road to the sale. Rethink your road to the sale. Pick up with the customer where they left off whenever they show up. All right, so this has been a great conversation. Let's get into how we do it. Where do we start? And the big thing that Mike teased earlier that he was about to jump into is mapping, process mapping.
Okay.
But we really practice and implement and help experience mapping.
Yes.
Right? Less process mapping, more experience mapping. What is the difference, Matt?
So the different process mapping really revolves around the dealer and what do I want the customer to do? What's all the behind the scenes stuff? I kind of lay out process mapping, kind of what Disney World does. It's all the stuff under the tunnels that you don't get to see, right? That's what you would do, and we typically process map. Customer experience mapping is what does the customer see? What is the customer's engagement? And what should that look like? So if I show up on your lot and you have 5 people standing out on the point smoking cigarettes, right, and fighting over who's going to come and greet me, is that the experience we want? So we want to do is look at it from the customer's lens. What does the customer experience as they're going through each step? And then we start aligning processes to what are we okay with and what are we not okay with, right? And whatever we're okay with, then we focus on those areas and how do we improve that. And all we look at is what does the customer see, not what do we have to do in the background.
And we've got to agree that if we're going to go down that path, we all agree as a team at the dealership that our North Star is the customer experience.
Yes.
Is that experience trumping everything else when it comes down to the store and some of the processes around the sales associates, the internet team? If that's the focus, then great. Now we can move forward and, to your point, really look at our process from the customer's lens. And it's not easy, because a lot of times we'll revert back to, well, what is our experience and how do we think that's going to make the experience better? Well, we got to really look from the customer's lens.
Right. And I don't want them to do that. It doesn't matter that the customer wants to. I don't want them to do that. Well, but the customer's going to find the information somewhere. It's out there.
Yeah. So experience mapping is really looking at what the customer goes through as they're interacting with your store and where the pain points might be for them. If you're looking at it from their eyes, from their shoes, and where there are opportunities to create moments of magic for the customer.
Create moments of magic, absolutely. And I love how you said that. We have to agree the customer experience is the North Star. Everything we do should be with that in mind. And then just how do we back into that?
You know, it's funny when you look at this. This is a valuable process for your store to consider. And we look at the road to the sale that's been around forever. And, the team may agree that this is our road to the sale. This is our process for the customer. But I would tell you, put your managers in one side of the room and put your sales associates on the other side, and have them map out what the current process is today. And I challenge you to see what kind of reactions you're going to get, because what happens if they're different? And that happens a lot. Is we have this idea of what the process should be, but then what actually happens is completely separate.
Absolutely.
So we've got to really get together as a team to decide not only what are we doing today and what should be being done, and then to your point, how do we layer on what the customer's experience is so we can create a new process for that customer experience.
All right. So that's what experience mapping is. The reason we do it is to understand how we can create a consistent, elevated experience for them, and become that trusted advisor and make them, have an enjoyable time as they're working with us. And then the last thing is, what are the outcomes of it? Well, ultimately, that's what develops your action plan. Once you've gone through this exercise, you'll understand, here's what we need to go work on first as we prepare to launch this tool and create a modern retailing initiative for our store, right?
And that's how you know, from a technology side, how does that layer on top of the process? Because you can't start training until you know what the process should be.
Right.
So the worst thing you could do is start training to the functionality of the tool, but you don't want the salespeople to be doing X, Y, Z, or the internet team to be doing X, Y, Z. If you've got a process created first, and then you can layer on where you want that technology inserted, you now have a consistent experience that you can train new hires and you can train your entire team. Don't train to the technology without going through this type of activity, because, again, that's where you create disconnects.
Can't train to technology if you don't first understand how you want to leverage that technology. And that's the important part, right, is knowing that first. So that brings us to, how do we experience map? Well, you sit down with your entire team. This is a fun day. It's long, but ultimately everyone comes out, really understanding what we all have to go and implement. And this is several phased process, really. It starts at a high level, right? What is the high level customer experience that we want to create? And so, again, it focuses on the customer and their respective journey. So what you have here is just an example of how this starts out. The customer comes in for an appointment. Might be where we start. What do we want the experience to be when the customer arrives to the dealership, right? You guys can talk a little bit more about this if you want to jump in, how it starts high level.
So the whole idea when you're doing this is to break it off into different pieces. Don't try to map out the entire customer experience. Take whether it's their online piece to the showroom piece, right? And what that looks like. So what you first want to do is you want to map out, what's the customer experiencing right now? What does their experience look like at your dealership today? And then what we want to do is look at it and say, is that okay? Sure. Is that what we want it to be? And then we want to map out, well, where do we want it to go? And then we look at our processes and start saying, well, where's their friction? Where does our process, so we get up and we go to the desk, we want our salesperson to stay in front of our customer more. There's a problem. We know we would like them to stay in front of the customer, but our process right now is they keep having to get up and go to the desk. So great. Then we work on the solutions, but you first map out, what does the customer currently see today? Then you work on, what do you want the customer to experience? And then you start trying to mirror those things together.
I think it starts with making sure you have the right people in the room.
Yes.
Right? This is critical that the leadership team are in the room, general manager, general sales manager, but you also have your salespeople that are on the floor executing this, because that's really where you get the eye-opening moments, to where, again, you go back to seeing that the process that we all had in mind is completely different. So if we want to be consistent and we want the buy-in, we've got to make sure we're involving the people that are going to execute on this plan. So that's important. And trust me, this takes time. No one wants to sit in a room for multiple hours to go through this, because we're trying to sell cars. At the end of the day, this is a great time to be doing this. And if we dedicate some time to go through this, I guarantee this is going to be beneficial for the entire store, because we now have a formalized process. So that's the first step, is making sure we have the time and we've got the right people in the room to sit down and go through this process.
And you don't need all of your salespeople to participate, but we do recommend pulling what we call your influencers into this session, into this exercise with you. Your influencers are the people on the floor, the people in the BDC, the people in the internet department that are natural leaders that the rest of the team is typically going to follow. That you know that once we leave this room and we start to implement this, if they don't buy in, we're going to have a hard time getting everyone else to buy in, right? You've got to make them a part of it.
And it goes to, that's how you create buy-in. I'll let your process fail. I won't let my process fail. So by having them in the room and having them come up with the process, if you just come in and tell me, I want you to do this, this, and this, yeah, sure, okay. When I'm involved in creating the idea and I'm saying this is what we came up with, I'm not going to let that fall down. You got to bring them in and make them part of creating the process.
Right.
So this is the first step. The next step is to then break this down further into every touch point.
Absolutely.
Right? On this screen, we're showing what happens when the customer comes into the store and what that experience looks like for them now, and then what we want it to be. And then we understand what our action plan is from there. The next step is if somebody submits a credit application and they don't have a trade, what does that process need to look like for them? So we are mapping this, we're doing this experience mapping session for each touch point, correct? What happens when they call? What happens when they submit a traditional lead? What happens when they enter our digital retailing tool and complete X? Correct? We're doing each of these.
Yes.
That's what you train to, right? That's what you train to, and that's what you fall back on.
So come prepared. It's going to take you a few hours, but it'll be worth it.
Well, and again, you can break this out, right? How do you eat the elephant? One bite at a time. So I get it. You can't necessarily do every process map in your dealership all at once.
No.
Pick one or two. You start with that, and then it just becomes a routine thing. So then we just work on, okay, now what about this scenario, and what about this scenario? And you can build off of that. Right. But this is exactly what we would do when we come to a dealership to get that, buy-in, for lack of a better term, but make it their process.
Yeah. And just going back to looking at the pain points, something that is really successful is just, as we talk about these pain points, we identify it, write it down on another piece of paper. Make sure you have those pain points identified. Again, are we trying to speed up the process? Are we talking about efficiency? That's always a big concern that customers have. Being left alone where the salesperson goes up to the desk multiple times. Those are common pain points. The waiting time to go into F&I.
Way too long, yes.
Yeah.
These are all common things that everyone experiences, but let's identify it in this process session. Let's write it down so we can know that we want to make sure we touch on these things when we build our new process.
And what will help.
Correct.
Yeah.
Each of us.
Great. All right, so now that we have conducted this experience mapping exercise for each kind of touch point that the customer has, the last piece is to build out your action plan. And this is pretty simple. As you start doing all of these experience mapping exercises, you're going to figure out, okay, this is something that we need to go change. We've got to go and audit our CRM and update our messaging so that it matches what we're doing over here, whatever the case is. You've got to start writing out that action plan. And typically, we always recommend starting with things that require less effort but make a bigger impact first. Do the easy stuff that has an immediate impact. Just do that first because your team is going to feel it. You're going to feel it. You're going to be willing to put in a little bit more effort there. Plus, why not start with the easy stuff first?
Well, and what I do is actually this exact sheet that you're seeing here, right? That low effort, high impact. So once you've done your process mapping and you've laid out all the things you'd like to do, so we have our wish list of what we're going to do to make this all great. Well, then you start bucketing it, right? So which bucket does it fall into? Is it not going to take a lot of work? How much are we going to get out of it compared to how much work is it going to take? And then it helps you start with where should you start. You can't do it all at once. Start with anything that doesn't take a lot of work. It's going to have a big payoff. Slowly work to the things that are going to take a lot of time but have a big payoff, and stay away from anything that's going to take a lot of time and not really have a big payoff. But it gives you, now you have an area to go and start with. You don't need to do this all at once. You can break it up, one bite at a time, and this is a great way of doing that.
And who's responsible for it?
And who's
and
responsible?
a due date or a deadline. You can start to assign those things from there. And we'll have worksheets. We'll have experience mapping, kind of blank printouts that you can kind of use so that you can begin this process in your store. If you want them, please reach out to us. But that is it for today's session on aligning process with technology to create a thriving modern retailing initiative. Thanks for joining us today, and thanks again to Brian Pasch and his entire team for allowing us to participate in this great workshop. All right, guys. Thanks.
Thank you.